up sound here? Should I put it like you're gonna put it closer, like right here?
Yeah, that might pick up sound better. Thank you.
Okay. All right, good. Yes, time's going. Okay.
Cool. So, yeah, our project is just about how student and professor relationships impact classroom environment and how students learn in class, and that can be different from student to student, but having that one-on-one personal relationship can help sometimes.
Yeah.
So, I guess the first question I have is, what brought you to CU?
Oh, well, this was the first big job I had offered out of graduate school. So I finished my PhD at the University of Texas in 2008. And I had taught for the 4 years I was there, and I had taught for 2 years at the University of New Mexico when I was doing my master's degree prior to that. Some time off in between to work on other things. But when I had finished, or was finishing up my dissertation at the University of Texas, you know, I was doing that to pursue a job as a professor. That was a career move. So I had always been thinking about, you know, what are the open jobs, and so there's a fairly standard employment cycle in academics where jobs get posted, usually in the summer and the fall. You interview over the winter, follow-up interviews in the spring, and then you get brought on for the next fall. So during my final year at Texas, I was very involved in that employment cycle and going to conferences and doing interviews. And the Colorado job was open. I knew it was going to be open, and so I had been pursuing it. Yeah. And you know, it just worked out to get an interview, and then a follow-up interview, then a campus visit, and some follow-up stuff. And they offered the job, and I was happy to take it.
Yeah, and about what year was that you were?
That was, I was interviewing throughout 2007, 2008 school year, and then I started August 2008.
Okay.
That's when I started on campus here.
Cool. And then, so going from Texas and New Mexico and come to CU, how did you notice a big difference in just the people or the students, or what people were pursuing in their careers and all that kind of stuff?
Certainly the weather's better here.
Yeah.
Texas it's too hot for me coming from the north, but we had a great time in Austin. It was a lot of fun. Our first son was born there. We have just great memories, but we're not Texas people. We're from, both of my wife and I are from up north.
Yeah.
We like winter and
That's
seasons.
where my dad's from. So.
Yeah. So, you know, not a big, no differences that I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah. So
New Mexico in general is a fairly poor state nationally, and so that's going to be reflected through all aspects of public education. Mm-hmm. But the mission of the University of New Mexico is different. It's not a top-tier state university. It is trying to educate students of New Mexico. They have a different financial model where a lot of students are funded through the lottery scholarship. So you get a lot of students who are going to college that wouldn't otherwise be able to go to college. Mm-hmm. And so that has all kinds of ripple effects throughout the kind of student who shows up in the classroom, a lot of first-generation students. And so, yeah, that I would expect that to show up in the kinds of people who are in the classroom, the kinds of projects that they're pursuing, the backgrounds they've had. So that's different than the University of Texas and the University of Colorado, but it's what I would have expected.
Yeah.
Texas is, you know, definitely a top-tier state university, up there with California and Virginia and Michigan and Wisconsin. And so you get a different caliber of student. It's also a lot bigger. You know, there's 50,000 people there. There's a fair amount of money at Texas. It's a pretty well-resourced university. And so that shows up across all aspects of teaching and classroom stuff. And then Colorado's a little different. Yeah. Colorado's a fantastic school. I love my job here. We are not a top tier state university, but we're also not necessarily trying to be. Yeah. Colorado has carved out a niche, particularly in science and engineering, where it is a top.
Especially that aerospace program.
Yeah, but we're not big enough to be one of these elite state institutions. Yeah. We don't have the athletic department. We don't have the state funding. We get so little money from the state. We're 50 out of 50 for state universities that get state funding.
Yeah, I see that in my tuition bill.
Right.
Every semester.
We are a tuition-driven university. We're pretty much the University of Colorado in name only in terms of state funding. So there's a dynamic there where about almost 50% of our operating budget needs, well, let me put it this way. University of Colorado needs to hit an enrollment number of about 45% out-of-state students for our normal operating budget, because out-of-state tuition is much more. And of that 45% out-of-state, half will be from California. This was all stuff I was told at new faculty orientation. So that has a dynamic. University of Texas does not have nearly as big as an out-of-state population for students. It's a lot of Texas students. Same with New Mexico. So you're going to get a different dynamic when you've got a lot of out-of-state students paying nearly 3 times as much tuition as in-state students, and so that means that those students are coming from particular families. They're either pretty well-to-do or very not well-to-do and are getting assistance. And if half of those students are coming from California, that's going to have an impact, for better or for worse. Some of my best friends are from California. Nothing wrong with that. So those are all dynamics that are different, but they're not unexpected. I can't say I've seen anything radically different that surprised me. You know, people at Colorado are a little more outdoorsy than people in Texas. That's what I would expect. Stuff like that.
So coming from, now you're in Boulder, you spent some time at Texas and New Mexico, and just the time you spent with students and all that, maybe at New Mexico, like you were saying, the students might be first generation and they're really trying to get their foot in the door for their future and all that. How does that impact how you as a professor has to interact with the student or have a understanding of kind of where they're coming from and just how you work with them in that aspect?
Yeah, to me the biggest issue is the general socioeconomic status of students. Now, every student's a little bit different, but you know, thinking deductively, you reason from what you know about the aggregate to make general conclusions about the particulars. Sometimes it gets you in trouble because your assumptions are wrong, but generally you want to come in thinking this is an overall dynamic, and this is what I should generally assume about students or not assume about students. But honestly, I think a bigger factor is just, forgive me for sounding selfish, but it's more about me. Because as I've kind of joked in class before, you know, you all stay the same age. I get older every year. And so that changes the dynamic. So when I was at the University of New Mexico, it wasn't as much that New Mexico students were like this and Colorado students were like that. It's that I was a teacher in my late 20s and still kind of in the generation of the students that I'm teaching.
You knew all of the things that were in.
We were kind of listening to the same music, but that's different now. It's not, the students at Colorado, of course, are different than the students at New Mexico. But now I'm not a single guy in my late 20s. I'm a guy who's been married for 17 years and has 2 kids, and I'm in my mid-40s. That's a different dynamic. I'm officially a generation removed from the students in the classroom. So when I think about how I interact with students, it's less about where that particular student is at, other than just some general socioeconomic assumptions, and more about what are the limitations that I have as somebody who is officially removed from a lot of the pop culture references, some of the technological day-to-day stuff that students take for granted that I'm just not as involved in. That's so I try to play more to the fact that I'm not the cool younger professor. I'm officially, I look more like their dad than I look like their friends.
How does that like from that time until now, students coming into your office hours, you kind of get to know them on a one-on-one basis, and now that you aren't 20, 22, 23, and how does that kind of change your interactions with them, or how you try to relate with them and help them out on a personal level?
A couple things. I mean, at least I hope I've done this. I've totally just given up on trying to be cool and relevant and fit in with, like, just don't even try. You're older. You're middle aged. Just accept it, embrace it, and do the best you can. Now, I think for some of the classes I teach, I think it's really important that I stay up to speed on a lot of things that I might not be involved with.
Yeah.
So I may technically have an Instagram account that I don't use very much, but I need to stay up to speed on what's going on in the world of Instagram, for example.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that. I would say maybe a shift in more, I think the relationship has become more, if you'll forgive the term, parental and mentor-ish, rather than like, here's another young guy who can understand me and relates to what I relate to.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not trying, I hope I'm not, I'm not trying to be that guy, but I feel like I've got some life experience where I'm much further down the road than a lot of the students, and so I'm not a comrade along for the journey. I'm somebody who's already been there for quite some time. So I guess I've noticed a shift in the dynamic of more, conversations at New Mexico and I were younger were more like, we're in this together, help me understand this, versus now it tends to be more mentor-ish, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then so students come in and you get to know some students better than others, of course, because some come in more.
Yeah,
and
that's fine.
You just have conversations, all that. Well, when you're in that classroom setting and you're teaching and there's faces that you recognize a little bit more than others, and while you're teaching the class, does that impact how you kind of structure what you say in class or anything like that?
Probably not that much.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly want to be sensitive to not playing favorites or getting stuck in kind of a clique mentality that, let's be honest, often the case, the students who come more often are probably students who look and think more like me than not.
Yeah.
And so if I perpetuate that in the classroom and, make more references to sports and skiing that I like to do, thinking that, oh yeah, because they're here and they'll relate, but that alienates other people, I want to be careful to avoid. So that, I guess I try to be careful about that, that doesn't impact anything. I also want to respect any sort of emerging relationship that might be happening one-on-one. And so if a student feels like I'm taking advantage of a personal connection by calling on them more in class or singling them out or making informal comments about the weekend, I don't want to put them in an awkward position. So I try to separate that as much as you can.
Yeah. Do you see that, like in general, do students that do come in and get to know you a little better than some others, do they generally tend to be more vocal in class and have more of a say, or
I have not. I couldn't speak to that. I'm inclined to say no.
Yeah.
I mean, what I would say is, in general, those students do better in the class. That's just the reality of it. It's not. I hope it's not because I'm playing favorites in grading, and a lot of the grading is either out of my hands or it's pretty objective in terms of multiple choice quizzes.
Yeah.
But why I think students do better is because they get a better sense of how I think about things and how I would be reading their paper. And they also just pick up on a few pointers that I don't even remember to bring up in class in a formal sense, or as I'm offering feedback on a draft. They're getting extra feedback that admittedly other students are not getting.
Yeah. And so do you see like is there I mean, I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question, but do you see a overarching theme in the classes that you've taught at CU, or like the way that classes tend to go here at CU, or
I don't.
Does it just differ from semester to semester and class to class?
And I mean, one of the, I don't know what the right word is here, but one of the issues here at CU is, as much as I know what's going on in my classes, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what kind of goes on in other communication classes. We all visit, like I get assigned to visit another professor's class every year, and somebody gets assigned to visit my classes, and we write little reports and we interview the students. We do that every year. So everybody gets observed by somebody every year, and everybody is observing somebody else every year. So I kind of know what goes on, but I have no idea what it's like to be in a physics class, or a calculus class, or a sociology class. And so I don't know if what we're doing in our class, if students are like, oh my gosh, this is so different than the class I just took and the class I'm about to go to, or if, no, this is this is how most professors do things, and Matt does things pretty similar. So I don't know about any trends in that regard. I can say for my own classes, I think topically or subject-wise, each class has its own dynamic. But I tend to see that dynamic pretty similar across classes I've taught of the same subject, which makes me think it's pretty subject-driven.
Yeah, definitely. And then, like you said, you have no idea what goes on in those hard science classes.
Or any class outside a department, for that matter.
Exactly, yeah. And so, I mean, in aerospace, for instance, like, everything they do has a specific formula that they use, and there's just a very concrete right answer. You're either right or you're wrong. Whereas here in CMCI, there could be a lot of subjectivity depending on the assignment and the professor and the student and the relationship that they have. Is it ever hard to I don't know, if you read something in someone's paper that you don't generally agree with, or just like see something that might irk you a little bit or something like that? Like in CMCI, you can if you wanted to, you could dock them points if you really wanted to. Is it hard to really set aside those biases or anything like that when you're grading papers or some stuff that has more subjectivity?
For me, no, but I mean, of course, the nature of bias is that we're never fully aware of our biases, so I'm certainly subject to that like anybody else. But for the most part, I would say no, but mainly because I'm pretty intentional about that. So I think it could creep up on you if you just don't really think about it. But you've heard me talk in other classes, I'm pretty specific and intentional about what it is we're trying to do in these kinds of classes and why they're different, and how we're focused on critical thinking and insight and an approach to the world around us, not just objective canons of knowledge. Now, there are things where vocabulary words mean something and they don't mean something else, and if you get that wrong, you're going to get that wrong on the quiz or whatever, and that's not a problem. And there are some objective things about the stuff that we talk about. When we talk about Nazi propaganda, there was a time when that happened, and it was in Germany and it wasn't in other countries, right? Those are objective truths, and we need to get those right. But I don't have a problem with that. Where I think this becomes an issue is, the different kinds of arguments that people might make or ideas that they want to advance. But because I'm so focused on critical thinking and insight, I don't really care where you go with that. What I'm looking for is an approach to thinking. So if somebody writes their editorial essay for gun control, against gun control, for abortion, against abortion, I feel pretty good about my ability to set that aside and say, I really don't, in this assignment, I don't care what side you come down on. I'm interested in your reasoning, your argument, your analysis. If you're doing an analysis paper on social media and you're for privacy, against privacy, for big business and data sharing, against big business and data sharing, I don't care. I want to see something insightful. I want to see critical thinking. And if I see that, I'm happy to reward that, or give what you earned. It's really not my reward. And if it's just a lame paper, even if I agree with the conclusion, those papers tend to not get graded very well.
And in a paper you have time to look over it and really think about it, whereas in a classroom setting, someone could say something or do something, and in the moment it might shock you a little bit, and you don't have 10 minutes to think about what you're going to say and all that. So how have you managed, especially like in our persuasion class, for instance, a lot of times politics come up and people say things that might be pretty biased. How do you just like to keep that relationship with the class and with that student? How do you try and answer those questions when things do get kind of biased and heated up?
Because I've certainly noticed that over the years and have developed some things that I think work pretty well. To me, the biggest one is you got to recognize it right away. Like, oh, we're about to go there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's one of those questions. Oh, like this is not just like there's something bigger that could happen here depending upon how I respond right now.
Yeah.
This is not just a basic request for information or an inquiry about the logistics of the class. There's something bigger here. So being able to I think I've gotten pretty good at recognizing that right away, especially when if somebody's challenging something I've said or that I believe or whatever, and just you can't get defensive. It can't be me against. You got to recognize that right away.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I also try to deflect and diffuse pretty quickly. So I know that probably the first thing off the top of my head might not be the best response or even any response, because then it makes me seem defensive, and so if you can usually respond if the first thing out of my mouth can be a follow-up question. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like, where's that coming from, or what's being assumed here, or whoa, all right, that's a pretty heavy question. You know, I've certainly got some thoughts, but does anybody else want to weigh in? You know, stuff like that. So you just immediately, I'm passing the mic. Like, I'm not going to be the first one to respond here, because then it just gets into this, and that's not good. And then what that often happens is it buys me a little runway to think of a more constructive response, or to say, you know what, I don't even need to respond here. It's okay. And I can realize that. It also allows some new ideas to surface. It allows that person to reframe or realize maybe they said something more controversial than they thought they did. It allows other people to jump in, and then it gives me some resources that I can, okay, now that I've heard from them, and I've taken a breath, I bet I can put some things together here and come up with a more constructive response. So you got to recognize it right away, and I think if you diffuse and deflect a little bit, it buys you some time to just let the emotion go down a bit and be a little more constructive, or even just realize that I don't need to respond here. Let the students talk it through, and that's okay.
Have you, I mean, if you can share, have you ever had an instance where something was said in class or something happened in class, and one of those students that was involved, or one student or multiple, came in and talked to you about that after, or there was tension after that impacted just how the class went?
I'll be honest, I have been incredibly fortunate, and I have thought about this a lot. I have not had that sort of drama. I can't really point to a specific, I mean, some of it, I mean, just to toot my own horn here, I'll take some credit, because I think I've gotten okay at anticipating some of that stuff. You know, we're going to talk about this. These are some of the things that we're going to cover. I know a lot of people are going to feel differently. Let's just set some of that aside, and I think that helps. I think I qualify a lot of things a lot so that people aren't surprised by things. I think I can be fairly tempered, and even when I am advocating for something, I think I'm pretty clear, like, that's what I'm doing, and this is my perspective, and I understand people might think differently. So I think I've been able to avoid a lot of that for that reason. There's really only one instance that stands out to me, and this is just somebody coming up after class. It wasn't an issue, but teaching a big lecture class, and I mean, I'll spare you the details, but I was referencing an HBO show called The Wire, if you're familiar with that show.
I've heard of it, but I've never watched it.
Best show on television. Fantastic show, early mid-2000s, about the drug war and cops and public schools in Baltimore. And I was using it as an example of a lot of things, because there's just so many rich examples from that program that were relevant for what we were doing in class. And I put up a bunch of images from the program to show the different areas: the drug dealers, the cops, the people in jail, people in the public school, people in the media. What else did they have? I think those are the big, because they just followed a bunch of different storylines.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I did that. That was way early in the semester. Much later in the semester, we did a unit on difference and diversity and inclusion and things like that. And a student came up to me after class out of nowhere and just said, "Hey, can I talk to you about something for a second?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "You know, you think you're all great with your little class about difference and diversity, but you know, what you did, the way you showed black people on the screen is totally shitty. And I totally see through it." And I was like,
wow.
Recognize, like, okay, this is not just what date is our final exam. Like, okay, yeah. this is a thing.
Yeah.
First thing out of my mouth, tell me more. Like, I need a little time here to take a breath. And she just talked about how early in the semester, when I showed those images, when I showed people who were in jail, they were all black. Mm-hmm. She's like, you know, it's not all black people in jail, and not all black people go to jail. Yeah. And the way you're portraying, and I was like, okay, all right, we can work through this. And we talked about how, I said, well, those were all just screenshots from the show. I mean, I totally agree with you. It's just that in the show, the only people in the jail were these 4 black guys.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to portray, now whether I should have used that example or not, it's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
I think we came to a constructive conclusion. Mm-hmm. I sent her a follow-up email, maybe a day or so later, just saying, hey, just wanted to touch base and make sure, we're good, or not, which is okay too. Yeah. But I appreciate your courage saying stuff and pointing things out that maybe I didn't consider. And honestly, I don't even remember if I heard back from her, but I have seen her. I mean, she's graduated and.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Is she walking around saying, "Oh, this idiot white guy professor is so ignorant of all this stuff about race and class, and he doesn't know what he's talking about"? Mm-hmm. Maybe. Is she walking around thinking, I had a really good interaction with a professor at CU one year. Mm-hmm. I was concerned about this, but he really listened to me. Maybe she says that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've never had any, students going at it. Hey, everybody, break it up. I've never had people really call me on stuff, mm-hmm. other than just, a good-natured disagreement.
Yeah.
And
which is healthy in a class.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's happened in our classes where I hope you've seen me just kind of like, yeah, that's a good point,
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I don't, that's the only one really that's ever happened. I've taught a ton of classes for a long time, and I just haven't had that kind of drama.
Yeah. Do you see any difference from a freshman class or an intro level class to more of a senior level class, or even your different schools where Texas might be a little more conservative, being in Texas, and Boulder's pretty liberal, and just kind of those differences? I mean, there's a huge difference between an 18-year-old and a 22-year-old, and there's a big difference between the culture here at CU and the culture at Texas or New Mexico. So do you see are different groups of people better at responding to that type of stuff than others? Or?
Yeah, I've certainly seen differences across freshman, sophomore, junior stuff, but that it's not on a particular issue. It's just freshmen just tend to be either totally drowning and just lost and don't come to class and don't know what's going on. Yeah. That's a minority. Or they're just so concerned about following the rules that they're not thinking for themselves. They're not questioning the professor. They're not questioning the course material. They're just, what do I got to do to get the grade and get ready for the exam? And so you see that more with underclassmen, whereas juniors and seniors are a little bit more like, that wasn't my experience, or I think differently about that, and that's really good. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it that much in terms of liberal, conservative across different universities. Yeah. I think, although Boulder may be a fairly liberal place, it actually attracts a fair amount of conservative-minded folks. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's be honest, people who can afford to pay out-of-state tuition here, just, again, as a deductive demographic, people who tend to have that kind of money tend to be a little more conservative.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And have kids who are raised in households like that. or they're coming from rural parts of Colorado. But in Texas, there's a lot of really high achieving, progressively minded students. And, I'm kind of all over the map on some of these issues as well.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen it that much.
Yeah.
I'm also not teaching classes. I mean, we're not doing the economics of healthcare in my classes. We talk about some things that have some political implications, like we're doing in the persuasion class right now, but I don't know. I think I haven't sensed any. I'm sure there's things simmering below the surface, but it hasn't bubbled up to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of what I've gotten is that students that are willing to interact with you or kind of maybe take that first step, because you have so many students that you can't initiate any relationship
it's harder
with a student really because you have,
and you don't know if that's what a student wants.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe those students, and obviously there's going to be students that you don't get to know very well that are going to get 95% in the class.
Yep.
But in general, maybe those students that interact with you, come into office hours, get to know you, they generally do okay in the class then.
I think they do better than they would have if they didn't.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean that every student that I get to know a little better does better than everybody else.
Yeah.
So I've had plenty of students who come to office hours a lot, and they're not the highest performing students. But it's pretty clear that, boy, if we would have talked about this, you would have done a lot worse.
Yeah.
I think there's also sometimes a misconception. Students think that because they might align with me politically, culturally, socially, whatever, that they might get a little more of a pass. And I've never had anybody explicitly say that. But I've noticed a few papers over the years that seem to be, people think maybe that I'm aligned with them and therefore they're going to do fine, and it's just a lousy paper.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an editorial essay on a subject they think I agree with, but it's just a bad argument.
Yeah.
And they do poorly. So that happens. But overall, I would say on the whole, probably students who come and develop more of a relationship, overall, over time, across classes, probably do better, although I don't know the statistics on that.
Yeah.
But I would say they definitely do better than they would have had they not come in.
Yeah.
But every semester, there's students I never see come to class half the time and do great.
Yeah.
Because they get their stuff done, they read the material, they follow directions.
Yeah.
It works out.
Yeah. That's hard too, because like talking about students think they align with you. I mean, just in my own personal experience, I've gotten bad grades on papers, and I know that the reason was because professor did not like what I had to say because it was written on the paper that they didn't agree with that. So it's hard to, as a student, it's hard to really know what that professor is looking for, because some professors might be really open about their bias, and I mean, some professors they tend to share a little bit about themselves at the very beginning, and you can kind of get a sense of what they're about a little bit from the beginning. So that's interesting that students still do that, because it's it's hard.
And that's where I wish I had a better sense of what students deal with in other classes. So if somebody wrote an editorial essay on a position I didn't agree with, I just want to see the argument.
Yeah.
And I'm fine saying, look, this is just a bad argument.
Yeah.
Or there's been papers I really disagree with that it's a great argument.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I don't like where this is going, but I really have to contend with this argument. But again, that's also the nature of the course. It's on persuasion and developing good arguments.
Yeah.
So that's a little different than a class where that's not the focus, where you just might get dinged for what you think about climate change or gun control or taxes or abortion or whatever.
Yeah.
That I don't have a good sense of that dynamic in other classes. I wish I did.
Yeah. You get a feel for the professors because you start to repeat professors as you get going on. So I know that like students, just when you're registering for classes, you go, oh, I might not take this class because it's with this professor and that kind of stuff. And I mean, just for the analogy that I kind of think of is like you can't make a fish climb a tree, and like every student learns differently. So
that's a good way to put it.
You get professors that you might understand what they're saying a little better, or you have a little better relationship with them, and you just find it easier to learn in their class because of the relationship that you have with that professor. and you try and repeat classes with them because you did well in their last one, or you don't take this professor because you didn't do well in their last class. So.
And I have, developed my own sort of informal personal metric on this, and it's just, I know students who I disagree with.
Yeah.
And there are some students who are more vocal in certain classes, and I know I don't agree with that. And I think, all right, but I can think of lots of students where we have had a good relationship, where that student has consistently, like, they think we are on good terms.
Yeah.
They've come talk to me, and to me, that's a good measure of success.
Yeah.
It's kind of fuzzy and subjective, but if that student who I know, we do not agree on a lot of stuff, but I also know that they think we're doing okay, and they like me, I think, at least it seems like it, and they continue to pursue me, that says I must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Either I'm either checking my bias, or my known critique of their position is not pushing them away.
Yeah.
That to me is a good measuring stick, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. But I don't know, it's definitely an interesting thing to think about how different professors teach and how that impacts the students and how they learn in the class and how they participate, and just kind of the overall culture that each classroom has and each relationship is with the students and professors.
Yeah, because I have had classes, and even in the same class, thinking of one in particular, but across it, where I have had students who are very visibly and vocally liberal or conservative, and both of them have talked to me individually as if like I'm on their side. You know, and it's like, to me, maybe I might be off on this. I'm just holding it with an open hand, but I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, that you're not presenting.
If people from multiple perspectives in office hours think like, well, I'm really kind of on their side. I think I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. I think so too. Yeah. I think that's about all I have for right now. But
that's great.
Yeah, that was good insight. It's interesting to hear a teacher's